there are studies showing that sexual behavior itself can increase testosterone. Men who observe sex, so I guess this would be observing pornography, will have slight increases in testosterone during the observation. These people actually were willing to have blood draws taken while watching pornography. They had increases in testosterone that were very modest, of about 10%. Whereas when people participated in sex, they actually did this study where people had blood draws and they had real sex with their partners, they had 70% increases in testosterone. So there are increases in testosterone that are quite significant during the physical act of sex, and far less so during observing sex. Now, the question that I often get, in fact, it's one of the questions I get most often in the comments on YouTube, I don't know why that is whether or not ejaculation adjusts testosterone levels. And it turns out, there are two studies that I could find that were quality studies on PubMed that address this, that sex and ejaculation itself does not reduce testosterone levels, although it will increase prolactin levels for the reasons I described a moment ago. However, abstinence or sex without ejaculation for a week or more will increase testosterone levels up to 400%. So the answer is actually complicated. It's not straightforward. What it means is that sex itself increases testosterone. However, abstinence also increases testosterone even further. We have to be breathing properly. It almost sounds kind of, like kind of new agey, like, oh, you have to breathe properly to get your hormones right. But no, you have to breathe properly to get your breathing and sleep right so that your sleep can actually be deep enough and you're not entering apnea states. And then that will support gonad function. And I wouldn't be putting this out as one of the main behavioral tools up front if it weren't for the fact that the effects of apnea on these hormones are dramatic and terrible. And the positive effects of getting breathing right on these hormones, testosterone and estrogen, are dramatic and wonderful. So let's talk about a few of those studies briefly so I can underscore the value of proper breathing in order to optimize hormones. When apnea is reduced in sleep or eliminated, there are significant increases in testosterone in males and in proper estrogen to testosterone ratios in females. And the way that it works is very interesting. Apparently, it works by reductions in cortisol. Now, cortisol is a stress hormone that is released early in the day as we wake up and serves healthy roles in protecting us against infection, reducing inflammation, etc. But you don't want cortisol to be too high, and you certainly don't want it elevated too long throughout the day and night. And so we all know, because now we've been told a lot in the last decade or so, that getting proper sleep is important for all these aspects of health. Getting proper sleep can really offset all the reductions in testosterone and estrogen and reductions in fertility that occur if we don't get enough sleep. But seldom is it discussed how sleep actually adjusts things like testosterone and estrogen. And it does it by modifying cortisol. So the molecule cholesterol can be converted into testosterone or estrogen, but there's a competition whereby the cholesterol will turn into cortisol and not testosterone, or it'll turn into cortisol and not estrogen if stress levels are too high. Many people, however, are starting to do this thing of taping their mouth shut. Now, this sounds a little bit extreme, and you certainly don't want to do this in any way that's dangerous. James Nestor talked about this in his book, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, that simply taping shut the mouth with some tape that will allow you to open your mouth if you really need to during sleep can allow people to shift over from being mouth breathers and snorers to nose breathers. In the daytime, the best way to get good at nasal breathing is to dilate the nasal passages, because a lot of people have a hard time breathing through their nose. And one way to do this is to just breathe through your nose more. And one way to do that is that when you exercise, in particular cardiovascular exercise, most of the time, provided you're not in maximum effort, you should be nasal breathing. Now, for a lot of people, nasal breathing during exercise is hard at first, but as you do it, because the sinuses have a capacity to dilate over time, you'll get better at it. There's now a lot of literature showing that breathing through the nose, not through the mouth, is powerful for improving lots of things. First of all, it improves cosmetic features of the jaw and face. This was first well established by my colleagues at Stanford in a book called Jaws. It's not a book that a lot of people know about, unfortunately, but it really describes the benefits of nasal breathing and the terrible things that happen when people, in particular children, but adults also, are heavy mouth breathers. So mouth breathers have changes in the cosmetics of their face and jaw that are really bad in terms of attractiveness. And this was done in twin studies. You can look in the book and see some of this. It's really dramatic how being a mouth breather tends to make the chin drop back behind the upper mandible. There's a lengthening of the face, a drooping of the eyes. It can be quite dramatic or modest depending on how much mouth breathing. Now, sometimes we have to breathe with our mouths, but there's also a lot of data and studies described in this book, Jaws, that describe how nose breathing in wakefulness and in sleep promotes all sorts of positive things related to not just cosmetics, but also the improvement of gas exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the body. And as well, it can modify levels of different neurotransmitters and neuromodulators in ways that positively can impact hormones. Although the way that it does that is by making you a better sleeper, which allows you to produce more testosterone and the appropriate amounts of testosterone and estrogen. But It does that in part through indirect mechanisms because deep sleep supports the gonads, the ovaries and the testicles, and their turnover of cells and the production of cells. Remember, in the ovary, particular cells and the egg follicles themselves make estrogen, and in the testicle, that the Sertoli cells and the Leydig cells are important for the formation of sperm and for testosterone, respectively. Okay, so now let's talk about the role of specific compounds, many of which can be taken in supplementation form or extracted from diet and nutrition in order to optimize sex steroid hormones. It's very clear that certain collections of nutrients are useful for promoting testosterone and estrogen production in their proper ratios. And those things are what I would call the sort of usual suspects. Vitamin D, which is important for so many biological functions, including endocrine functions, zinc, magnesium, etc. I personally have supplemented with zinc, magnesium, and vitamin D for years, but many other people do that as well. And the question is always how much, and that's why I'm a proponent of getting blood work done, because that's how you know whether or not your androgen levels, as well as things like vitamin D levels, etc., are sufficiently high. Heavy weight training, but not weight training to failure, where completion of a repetition is impossible, leads to the greatest increases in testosterone. Now, I'm sure there are a bunch of exercise jockeys out there that are going to, come at me with a bunch of things where, oh yeah, but high volume and this and training to failure and that. Sure. If you're willing to kind of put things side by side, adjust for exogenous testosterone treatment and all the rest, which was done in these studies, what you find in general is that weight training with heavy loads, so anywhere from 1 rep maximum to somewhere in the 6 to 8 repetition range in males or females, increases testosterone significantly. And it does it for about a day, sometimes up to 48 hours. If you want to optimize testosterone and estrogen, you need to get your light viewing behavior correct. It's not just about optimizing your sleep, which is also important. It's about getting sufficient amount of light in your eyes so you have sufficient levels of dopamine. So the simple protocols for that I've reviewed before, but it means getting anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes of bright light exposure in your eyes early in the day. It is not sufficient to do this with sunglasses unless you have to do that for safety reasons. It's fine to wear prescription lenses and contacts. If you can't get sunlight for whatever reason, you want to use bright artificial light. But that is absolutely critical for timing the cortisol release properly, limiting cortisol release to the early part of the day, getting increases in dopamine that are going to promote the production of testosterone and estrogen to healthy levels. The other aspect of light viewing behavior that's extremely important is to avoid bright light exposure to your eyes in the middle of the night. If you're viewing bright light in the middle of the night, you are suppressing dopamine release. If you're suppressing dopamine release, you are suppressing testosterone levels. So much so that I would wager that a major effect of sleep deprivation on reducing testosterone and estrogen is not necessarily because of the lack of sleep per se. It's because usually when people are not getting enough sleep, they're getting too much light in their eyes in the middle of the night as well. A study on this has not been completed yet, but there are 2 studies published in Cell and Neuron, both Cell Press journals, excellent journals, showing that viewing bright light with the eyes in the middle of the circadian night has a detrimental effect on dopamine and therefore has a detrimental effect on things like testosterone and estrogen. So you can't even begin to talk about supplements and other ways to optimize testosterone, diet and its effects on testosterone and estrogen and fertility and reproductive behavior, etc., until you get your breathing right, until you get things like your light viewing behavior right. So bright light early in the day and throughout the day is great. View as much bright light, ideally sunlight, as you can, as much as you safely can. You obviously don't want to burn your retinas or damage your retinas, so never look at any light that's so bright it's painful to look at. But getting a lot of light in your eyes is not just about adjusting your sleep-wake rhythms, it's also about optimizing your sex steroid hormones.